the same brand of computer for the last 15 plus years. From the same company, I have purchased phones, tablets, a watch for my dad, and all of my computer accessories, they all have the same piece of fruit on them. And I am an extraordinarily loyal customer. I have all the things, I know how they work together, and I know who to call if they don't work. I know how to get them fixed. So a couple years ago, we needed a new main office computer, and we did a lot of graphics in the office, and these computers are known for graphics processing, so I suggested we purchase a computer from this company with the fruit on it. And yes, it would initially be a little more expensive, but we would save money over time, and with maintenance expenses and software and things like that. So to be good stewards, we bought a recently refurbished model, an integrated model, like the computer was the screen, right? And a 2-year protection plan, so that if anything went wrong, we knew the computer company would just fix it or replace it. So during Christmas, when we were really busy, the computer screen stopped working. Oi is right. Now, since the computer is the screen, this was a problem. So Lee told me, no, that's the problem with those things. Once the screen goes down, the whole thing is just a house of cards, right? It's all gonna break down. So we were able to access the contents of the computer, connect it to a laptop, and then transfer it. That's another reason I like this computer brand. And we continued to run the office without interruption. But now that things have slowed down, we noticed that our care contract is going to expire soon. And so we reached out to the company, and they wanted us to do some advanced troubleshooting, which is hard when you can't even get the thing to turn on, right? They kept saying, what's on the screen? Nothing. There's nothing on the screen. So they offered me an appointment, and they offered me 2 different places in Springfield. Okay, you're gonna have to take your computer to Springfield. So I chose the first option on the list, which is a very large electronics store that will not be named in Springfield. They have a nerd herd, so to speak, of people who will diagnose and assist you with your device problems. I know these guys are not certified to work on the brand of computer we use. I know they primarily deal with the other kind of computers. I know they are just gonna file the complaint, box it up, send it to California or wherever it's going, and then we would get a different one, because that's how that works. That's how that works. But you just have to go through the proper channels, right? And that store was the channel. So I got there early, because I'm me. I waited in line. My appointment time passed. I waited some more. I finally sat down in front of one of them, pointed out the computer I'd brought in, and explained the problem. So he said, well, let's see if it works for me. Good luck. Good luck. So he plugged it in, and then he turned to me in surprise and said, it doesn't even come on. When I wasn't there for the fun of it. Let's spend a good evening hanging out at the computer store. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone work quite so hard not to help me as this guy did. I don't know why this worker did not want to process the claim with the fruit company, send the computer off, and receive it back for pickup on our behalf, but he did not want to do it. I will spare you the details, but he tried every possible reason he could think of that I had to either come back another day or take it to the other store on the list. He was visibly delighted every time he thought of another potential hurdle for me. Oh, you don't have another device with you. Oh, I guess I can't do it. Hold on, click, click, verification code, phone call, and we're in. Yeah, I didn't buy my first one of these yesterday. And also, I work with Lori Lippy. And she sent me with a folder of documentation with the serial number, password, and proof of purchase for every device we had ever bought from that company. We don't play the you don't have the right paperwork game with me and Lori, because we're Methodists. If there's one thing we know how to do, it's paperwork. So he went into the back room for a moment while I waited for the verification code from Lori. And I don't know what happened in the back room. I don't know who he talked to. But he came out and doubled down that this was not going to happen. I should go to another store. I should go back to the fruit company. I should get another appointment and have them do it. So we had a little pep talk. I talked. He did not pep. And I said, look, if you all don't want to do work for this company, why don't you have your company call their company and work that out? But that's not going to happen until tomorrow. So today we're going to file the claim on my computer, and I have everything necessary, and you're going to send our computer off to be fixed today at this appointment. I mean, what was he going to do? Break the computer? It didn't work. Now, I generally tried to be a joy to the people who provide customer service, but I knew more about how the computer and the company worked than he wanted me to. And I looked at the line of people behind me who were all older than me, and I wondered how many people get sent away from their everyday with no help at all because they didn't bring all the papers, or they don't know how the companies work, or they're not a digital native. I had to be persistent to get the help I needed and that I'd been told I would get. But people are like that, right? People are like that. And I mean us too, we're people. Some people just don't want to do the things they're supposed to do. There are things I don't like to do, but I didn't get a job doing those things, right? But I will say, some people don't have as much of a choice as I had. For some people, a job is a job, and whatever you can get paid to do, that's what you have to do, and then we end up in front of them, or they end up in front of us. And one of us doesn't want to do the thing that we're supposed to do. And if they can find any excuse, any rule, any hurdle that will give them an excuse to not do what they're supposed to do, that's what we're going to hear back. Oh, I can't do that for you because you didn't sign the form on the right day. Sometimes people have to be persistent with us, and sometimes we have to be persistent. In today's Bible stories, we run into people who want help. In the Numbers passage, we have a family of daughters who would like to inherit what their deceased father left behind. The problem is, the law says inheritance goes to his son, which he doesn't have. The daughters come to Moses. They know what the law says, but they want help. They want a more just outcome. They think maybe an exception should be made, but they don't say it's an exception for just them. They're saying maybe the law isn't taking into account a lot of people's reality, and they would like that to be considered. That's bold. In the story of Jesus, Jesus and the disciples run into a woman who is so unlike them. The disciples don't even talk to her. I've preached this passage before and covered this Canaanite woman, so I'll be brief. She was Canaanite, according to Matthew. In another Gospels version, she is Syrophoenician. She probably had money. She wasn't Jewish, different culture, different language, different religion, different everything. And the disciples want Jesus to tell her to take her computer to another store. Jesus even says to her, I'm here for people that aren't you. Jesus tells her basically she is not his job. He does not work on Macs. But she persists. She confronts. She argues gently. And in this holy confrontation, Jesus is impressed and he heals her daughter. Jesus chose compassion over the limiting requirements of the rules. He doesn't have to help her, but he does. And she's persistent, right? So he does. We see the same thing from God in Numbers. Moses doesn't have an answer for all these daughters with names I'm only going to let Rex pronounce. Noah and her sisters. So Moses takes it to God. God, it's your law. You already made the rules. That's how they saw it. You already made the law, and we got an issue. And God says, yeah, they're right. We should make the rules better. Here's a new law. What? We think of God and God's rules being static, stationary, always the same. Because God is eternal. But God, through early days with Moses to later days with Jesus, moves beyond the limiting requirements of the law. The arc of God's action with human beings always bends toward compassion, toward mercy, toward more for more people, more love for more people, which is dramatically different from most of our customer service experiences. And if we're honest, more love for more people is dramatically different than a lot of our experiences with people. January 14, 1991 was my dad's 44th birthday. I was 14. My brother Rob was busy at college that night. We were going to have the classic birthday dinner for Dad, the thing my mom always made before they became vegan. We would have salad, bread, homemade lasagna, and German chocolate cake from the recipe on the box. Not a sheet pan, the 3-layer, That meal is such a strong childhood memory. And as we were getting ready to sit down for dinner on January 14th, 1991, the doorbell rang. Now, we weren't expecting anyone. We hadn't invited anyone. Polchows aren't all that social. My dad is more of an introvert than I am. So we didn't have parties for his birthday. We had private dinners that were just us on purpose, and the doorbell rang. And one of my parents went to the door and found Jeff, my brother's best friend since they met as middle schoolers at scout camp. He had driven over from Columbia because he remembered it was Dad's birthday. He didn't have a dad. So my dad was sometimes Jeff's dad. And he knew what we'd be having for dinner, and he was sure my mom had made enough. And my parents said, Jeff, would you like to join us for dinner? I got more dishes on the table. I love Jeff. I was surprised because we did have phones in 1991. That he had just shown up, but I was glad he was there. Jeff was the kind of friend that came and got my brother, and then they went out and did things. He wasn't the local, and so he didn't just hang out around the house, and here he was with just me, Mom, and Dad. It was a little weird without Rob there, but it was nice. Jeff was nice, but Jeff had just had his ear pierced because it was 1991, and he spent the entire meal cocking his head so that my dad couldn't see it because he knew my brother had been prohibited from having his ear pierced, and he failed to keep it out of my dad's line of vision. But we had a nice, chatty meal. But then my dad is a creature of habit, and after dinner, you go downstairs and sit in your recliner and watch the news. But we had an unexpected guest that Dad was really trying to enjoy. But it was his birthday, and it was time to go watch the news. So as we sat as long as Dad could stand, and Mom started to clean up, and Dad announced that it's time for the news. And Jeff said, can I stay and watch the news with you? And this was the first, so Mom and I were like, skip the dishes, we're all gonna go watch the news. This is weird. On January 14th, 1991, all that was on the national news was the beginning of Desert Storm. And we had increased involvement of US troops in the Persian Gulf. Desert Shield was changing into Desert Storm. And on one of the last commercial breaks, Jeff said quietly that he had a cousin with whom he was very close. They were like brothers, and he had just deployed to Kuwait. Now, in 1991, you couldn't pause the TV. So my dad turned it off. And I remember sitting very still as my dad asked Jeff questions about his cousin, what he did in the service, what he might be doing. And then my dad talked to him about what it was like to be a young person sent off to fight far from home. And he told Jeff how to encourage and support his cousin while he was in war, because my dad knew that. And that's why Jeff was really there, because on the brink of a war that hit too close to home, Jeff needed the comfort and wisdom of a veteran who had made it home. That's how my dad spent the evening of his 44th birthday. He didn't have to. Maybe he didn't want to. My dad's a pretty routine person, and he worked really hard at a job he did not love so we could have the life he wanted for us. And I did not understand that until I became a parent, and I was glad I already had a job I loved. But I knew as a kid that my dad's days were difficult, and he wanted nothing more than to come home, work out, eat a healthy dinner, go to his routine, watch the news. And this was the one day a year where mom didn't make a healthy meal. You know, she made his favorite meal. And he could skip working out and read the newspaper all night and talk to nobody, and we would not complain because it was his birthday, and that's how things work. There is a limiting requirement of the law of the breadwinner's birthday. But I learned that night from my dad a lot about what it meant to follow Jesus Christ and how we can choose to rise above the comfort of our static routine to meet people who need our help with compassion, like Jesus did, like God did, like God does. Some people think following Jesus is about doing things the way they're supposed to be done, the way that looks best, the way that encourages no comments. I cannot tell you how many people I have counseled through the years because they felt led, or they felt that it was the only option, or that they had discerned this was what God was calling them to do, and it was something that wasn't the way things are done properly. You know, the doors all opened for them in a direction that they never wanted to go. That doesn't look right. Babies came in the wrong order. Jobs were left when stability was what they had been brought up to value. Relationships they thought were forever ended. Moves happened. People had to start over from scratch. People would say to me, I feel like God is opening doors for me, but how could that be the direction? Do you know how the church people are going to look at me? Look, sometimes what is just doesn't look as good as what people expect to be right. We follow Jesus. We're not judged on how well we keep up appearances. Our righteousness comes from God, whose arc of interaction with humanity bends toward compassion and mercy and more love for more people, even us, even if we're Apple customers. Amen.